I've paid someone's bill anonymously at a cafe a few times. They still don't know it's me, and I like being the unseen hero. I've secretly paid for strangers' coffee more times than I can count, and they still have no idea it was me. It all started a few years ago when I was working at a tiny cafe downtown. My paycheck barely covered rent, food, and the occasional splurge on Netflix. Yet somehow, I found myself compelled to do small, anonymous acts of kindness. I don't know why. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was just wanting to feel important in a world that often makes you feel invisible. One rainy afternoon, a young woman came in, looking exhausted and carrying a stack of papers that probably weighed more than she did. Her eyes were tired, and her shoulders sagged under some invisible weight. On impulse, I told the cashier to ring up her latte and croissant as paid. I watched her face when she realized she didn't have to hand over a single coin, and her expression flickered from confusion to awe to relief. I laughed quietly to myself, feeling a strange warmth spread through my chest, like I had done something meaningful without anyone knowing I existed. After that first time, I couldn't stop. Every week, sometimes more than once, I would pay for the next person in line. Teachers, students, delivery drivers, even a guy who always ordered an absurdly complicated coffee that I'm sure took 3 minutes to pronounce correctly. Each time, I watched them leave, blissfully unaware of who had made their day a little lighter. The thrill wasn't in being recognized. It was in remaining invisible, like some kind of secret guardian angel. Invisible, but present. I even started leaving little notes, sometimes anonymous messages like someone believes in you, tucked under a napkin or on the cup sleeve, hoping it would make them smile. The weirdest part is that I've never been caught. No one suspects a thing. I see them occasionally in the cafe, maybe sipping their coffee, maybe looking around wondering if someone was behind the kindness, and I can't help but grin. The best part is that the chain sometimes continues, strangers paying for strangers without knowing why, like a ripple in the pond, and I started to feel like maybe I was part of something bigger than myself. No one knows the truth, not a single soul, and I kind of like it that way. Would you ever secretly do something nice for someone, knowing you'd never be thanked? After that first year of quietly paying for strangers, it became almost addictive. I started noticing patterns, little details that would make me decide who to surprise next. There was the elderly man who came in every Thursday morning, ordering the same black coffee and 2 donuts, muttering about bills and late rent. I started leaving a little extra money for him tucked under the napkins. Then, there was a group of students cramming for exams, always stressed, hair disheveled, eyes glued to their laptops, and I would pay for their orders and slip tiny encouraging notes into their bags. I never expected anything in return, and yet, the reactions I witnessed were like little fireworks exploding silently. The gratitude, the smiles, the confusion, it all felt electric, and I found myself looking forward to my cafe shifts not for the pay or the routine, but for the chance to watch someone's day transform without them knowing who made it happen. It wasn't always perfect. Sometimes I misjudged. Sometimes people left before they even realized their bill had been covered. One time, a teenager nearly shouted at the cashier when she tried to explain that their sandwich was already paid for. He stormed out, flipping his backpack over his shoulder, and I felt a pang of guilt, wondering if I had intruded on their life in the wrong way. But most of the time, it worked. Most of the time, it was beautiful. There were moments that stuck with me in a way nothing else ever had. One afternoon, I noticed a young man sitting alone, staring at his hands, visibly trembling. I could feel the tension radiating off him even from behind the counter. I told the cashier to cover his order, and when he realized he didn't have to pay, he looked up, eyes wide and glassy. He whispered a quiet, "Thank you," but there was something in his expression that made me feel like the gesture had done more than cover a meal. It had perhaps saved a little piece of him that day. I left the cafe feeling strangely elated, yet painfully aware that I would never know the full story of that moment. The anonymity, once a casual choice, started to feel almost sacred. I began thinking about how many small acts of kindness go unnoticed every day. How many people are quietly struggling and never receive even a tiny lift from the world around them. And yet, the secrecy of it all gave me a private thrill. There was something exhilarating about being invisible while holding such power over someone's day. I would catch glimpses of the same people coming back, sometimes looking around suspiciously, scanning the cafe as if trying to find the mystery benefactor, and I'd duck behind the counter or pretend to be busy, smiling inwardly. I never considered telling anyone, not a friend, not a colleague, not even the cashier, because revealing it would ruin the magic. The best part wasn't in being noticed, it was in being completely unknown. There was a strange intimacy in watching lives intersect through tiny gestures, in observing human emotion without the clutter of recognition or expectation. I remember one rainy morning, a mother with 2 kids came in, both of them clinging to her like little anchors in the storm. She looked exhausted, her jacket soaked, hair plastered to her forehead. I paid for her order, and when she realized she didn't have to pay, her eyes welled up. She smiled through the exhaustion and whispered a soft, "Thank you," almost as if she were confessing a secret herself. I wanted to tell her it was nothing, that someone out there cared, that she wasn't invisible, but I stayed silent. My anonymity was part of the gift, part of the story she would carry with her for who knows how long. Over time, I started noticing the subtle chain reactions. Sometimes, people who had received an anonymous gesture would pay it forward without even knowing why. A student would cover the next person's coffee. An office worker would leave a tip for the next customer. It created a strange ripple effect, almost like a quiet rebellion against the coldness of the world outside the cafe doors. And then, one evening, the most unexpected thing happened. A man came in, clearly frustrated, and slammed his wallet on the counter, muttering under his breath. He looked around nervously, as if suspecting something. When he finally noticed his order had been covered, he looked around again, eyes scanning the room like he expected to catch me in the act. I froze for a second, heart racing, and then ducked behind the counter pretending to sort receipts. He left without a word, but the intensity of that look stayed with me for days. It was like he had felt a presence, a ghost, and for a moment, I wondered if being invisible carried its own kind of power, one that could make someone question reality, if only for a second. I kept a small mental list of the people I had helped, not for ego, not for proof, but as a kind of diary of quiet victories. Each name was paired with a tiny memory, a smile, a flicker of surprise, or a laugh. I started to realize that this habit wasn't just about helping others. It was shaping me, changing how I saw the world. I became hyper-aware of subtle struggles, the way someone fidgets with their hands, the slump in their shoulders, the fleeting look of hopelessness. I wanted to be there, even if anonymously, to catch those moments and offer a small reprieve. Yet there was always a thrill of risk. What if someone caught me? What if the mystery was discovered and people started expecting it? That would ruin everything. The secrecy made the act sacred. The anonymity made them magical. And so I continued, week after week, letting my small acts ripple through the cafe, touching lives I would never fully see, never fully understand, but feeling them all the same. I laughed at the irony that such a simple gesture, a paid coffee, a croissant, a tiny note, could make me feel so alive, while remaining completely unseen. I've even started imagining a future where I continue this, maybe long after the cafe, long after my current life, as a quiet observer of joy and relief, a ghost weaving little miracles into the ordinary. No one knows. Not a single person suspects a thing. And I like it that way. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever meet someone I helped and learn the full story, or if the ripple will continue without me ever knowing. Would you secretly do something kind for someone, knowing you'd never be acknowledged? It wasn't until much later that I realized just how much these small acts had become a part of my identity, even if no one else knew. I began looking forward to the quiet moments in the cafe more than anything else in my life. The routine became almost meditative, arranging the cash drawer, wiping down tables, watching faces as they entered, anticipating who might need a little invisible lift that day. Some days were more obvious than others. A teenager slumped over a notebook with tears threatening to fall, a young man pacing nervously, clutching his phone like it held the fate of the world. These were the moments that made my pulse quicken. On rare occasions, I'd notice subtle signs of gratitude. A smile that lingered longer than it should, a hesitant glance around the cafe, as if someone was looking for their benefactor. I never revealed myself. I couldn't. The power of the secret, the magic of remaining unseen, was intoxicating. Then came the day when everything shifted in a way I hadn't anticipated. It was a Thursday, unusually warm for the end of October, and the cafe was busier than usual. A woman walked in, mid-30s, sharply dressed, carrying a briefcase and an aura of stress that practically radiated off her. She ordered a cappuccino and a slice of cheesecake, her voice brisk, distracted, her fingers drumming impatiently on the counter. Something in me, maybe instinct, maybe habit, told me to pay for her order. The cashier gave me a knowing glance, the usual signal, and I nodded. When she received her receipt and realized it was covered, her reaction was different than anything I had seen before. She froze, staring at the cup and then around the room, as if searching for some sign of who had done this. Her eyes flicked over me for a fraction of a second, and my stomach dropped. For the first time, I felt the tension of exposure, the terror that someone might actually know. But she didn't say anything, didn't come up to the counter, didn't try to find me. She just took her drink, sat down at a corner table, and looked out the window as if lost in thought. Something about her reaction stayed with me all day. That evening, I replayed it over and over in my mind. Had I been too obvious? Had she noticed something that might give me away? The thrill of the secret now mingled with fear, and for the first time, I wondered if the anonymity I cherished so deeply could be compromised. Weeks went by, and I continued my quiet mission, but I couldn't shake that moment. Then, one rainy Monday, it happened again, only worse. A young man in a hoodie, probably in his early 20s, came in, soaked to the bone, and ordered a black coffee and a muffin. Something in his expression reminded me of someone I'd known long ago, tired, burdened, desperate. I told the cashier to cover his order. When he saw the receipt, he gasped and muttered, "Wait, who?" before his voice trailed off. He looked around, scanning the room, and then his eyes landed on me. I froze, heart pounding, palms sweating. For a split second, I thought my secret was about to unravel. But then he shrugged, smiled awkwardly, and said, "Well, whoever did this, thank you," before leaving the cafe. I exhaled, a mix of relief and exhilaration washing over me. That brief moment of recognition, even without knowing it was me, was intoxicating. It made me feel powerful in a quiet, unassuming way. And yet, I also realized that this habit, as small and harmless as it seemed, had started to consume me. I spent hours thinking about who to help next, analyzing patterns in people's faces, imagining their struggles and victories. I began leaving more elaborate notes, sometimes drawings, sometimes tiny riddles, sometimes encouragements written in messy, hurried handwriting. I became obsessed with the ripple effect, imagining it spreading beyond the cafe, affecting lives I would never see. I noticed subtle changes in myself. I smiled more often, laughed quietly at little things, and found myself more patient with people in ways I hadn't been before. I also started feeling pangs of guilt when I couldn't help, when the cafe was empty and no one needed a lift, as if my purpose depended on the presence of other struggles. And then, the unthinkable happened. One evening, a man in his 40s came in, ordering a complicated drink with more modifications than I could count. He looked around nervously, glancing at the door and then over his shoulder. Something about him screamed that he was on edge, that he might be running from more than just the rain outside. I paid for his order, the usual thrill coursing through me. When he realized he didn't have to pay, he froze, staring at the receipt as if it were a puzzle, and then whispered, almost to himself, "Who are you?" My heart stopped. The cafe was crowded, but for a moment, it felt like it was just him and me. He looked around, his eyes sharp, almost accusing, and I ducked behind the counter, hoping to vanish from his sight. He lingered for a long minute, muttering under his breath, and then finally left, shaking his head. I couldn't stop thinking about it all night. The idea that someone might actually be aware, even in part, that I was behind these gestures, it terrified me. And yet, it thrilled me too. The secret that had once been a simple joy had transformed into a delicate balancing act. Each act of kindness now carried a weight, a risk I hadn't fully understood before. And even with that fear, I continued. because the truth was nothing had ever felt more alive, more essential than these quiet interventions in the lives of strangers. I started keeping a mental list, obsessively, of who I helped and how, wondering if one day someone might connect the dots and realize the extent of my little anonymous empire. I thought about the ripple, about the chain reactions, and I imagined that maybe, just maybe, one day, someone would know. But until then, the secrecy was intoxicating, addictive, and beautiful. No one suspects a thing, not a single soul, and I intend to keep it that way for as long as I can. But sometimes, late at night, I catch myself wondering, if someone found out, if one of them came looking for me, would I be proud, embarrassed, or scared? Would they laugh, cry, or would they simply walk away, leaving me in the shadows, as I've always preferred? And the thought lingers. Have you ever done something for someone, knowing they'd never know it was you? It all came to a head one chilly winter morning when the cafe was unusually empty, the kind of quiet that makes every creak of the floorboard sound amplified. I was wiping down tables, absent-mindedly watching the steam rise from the coffee machine, when the bell above the door jingled and she walked in. The woman from a few months back, the one I had paid for in October. She had a sharpness to her gaze that made my stomach twist. She didn't order anything at first. She just stood there, looking around, scanning every corner of the cafe as if she remembered every detail from her last visit. I froze behind the counter, heart pounding like a drum. For weeks I had replayed that moment in my head, and now, here she was, almost like fate had decided to test me. She walked slowly toward the counter, and my mind raced. Should I speak? Should I hide? My pulse was deafening. When she finally reached the counter, she looked at me directly, eyes narrowing, and said, "I know you've been doing it." My entire body went cold. My instinct was to deny it, to play innocent, but there was something in the way she said it, calm, not accusatory, almost curious, that made me pause. Doing what? I croaked, barely managing to sound casual. She smiled, a knowing, faintly amused smile, and placed her hand on the countertop. Paying for everyone. The coffees, the snacks. I've noticed patterns, and I think you're the one behind it. I swallowed hard, mind racing with panic, excitement, and a strange sense of pride. No one had ever come close to figuring it out, and now here she was, standing in front of me, knowing. I didn't know whether to run, laugh, or confess. My brain was a jumble of possibilities, and then she said something I'll never forget. "I think it's beautiful." The words hit me like a jolt of electricity. She wasn't angry. She wasn't exposing me. She was admiring it. I felt my shoulders relax slightly, but the thrill, the intensity, remained. She continued, telling me she had started noticing the small notes, the way the acts were perfectly timed, almost orchestrated, and that she had been quietly following the ripple effect for months. I wanted to ask her how she knew, but the words got stuck. She leaned in closer, voice dropping. "You don't realize how many lives you've touched, even if you think they don't notice." That moment shifted something in me. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. The secret that had always been mine alone now had a witness. And yet, she didn't intend to expose me. Instead, she started coming in regularly, quietly observing, sometimes leaving her own anonymous gestures in response. It became a silent partnership of invisible kindness. But the stakes increased without me realizing it. I started noticing more eyes on me, subtle glances from strangers, fleeting recognition. The fear of exposure mingled with the thrill of the secret. One day, a teenager approached me directly after noticing that his coffee was once again covered without explanation. He asked, hesitantly, "Are you?" I shook my head quickly, hiding my panic behind a smile. He nodded knowingly and walked away, a small smirk on his face. The moment passed, but it marked a turning point. I was no longer entirely invisible. People were starting to suspect, even if they didn't know for sure. Then came the incident that nearly shattered the delicate balance I had maintained for years. A man, mid-40s, came in, agitated, clearly looking for someone. He ordered 2 large coffees and a sandwich, muttering under his breath. As I covered the bill, he stopped mid-motion, staring at me, then the cashier, then back at me again. "I know who you are," he said quietly but firmly. My heart leapt into my throat. I froze, imagining every worst-case scenario. Confrontation, humiliation, the secret unraveling in a public space. But he didn't yell, didn't demand anything. He simply nodded once, a look of respect in his eyes, and left. The cafe was still silent, the air thick with tension. I realized then that my anonymity had limits, that the ripple effect I had created was no longer entirely under my control. People were starting to connect the dots, to sense a pattern, and for the first time, the power I felt was tinged with fear. Yet, in that fear, there was also an undeniable thrill, an affirmation that my small acts had meaning beyond my immediate perception. The woman from October, the teenager, the mysterious man, they were all pieces of a puzzle I had unknowingly started. And I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride mixed with apprehension. The acts themselves had always been simple, covering a coffee, leaving a note, but their impact was far-reaching, unpredictable, and profoundly human. I had inadvertently created a quiet network of kindness, one that extended far beyond the cafe walls. But it came with consequences. I had to navigate the line between remaining anonymous and being recognized, between delighting in secrecy and fearing exposure. Each act became a careful calculation, a balance between risk and reward. And yet, I couldn't stop. The thrill, the joy, the connection, even if indirect, was too intoxicating. I started keeping mental notes, not just of the recipients, but of potential observers, people who might suspect, people who might join the chain. The secret was no longer just mine. It was a living, breathing thing, growing, shifting, and expanding in ways I couldn't fully control. And despite the fear, the near reveals, the subtle tension in the air, I continued. Because there was something profoundly human about witnessing these small miracles unfold, about being the invisible hand that nudged someone toward a better moment, a lighter heart, a fleeting smile. No one knows the full extent. Not a single person has pieced it all together, though some are getting close. And part of me wonders, if they ever do, will they understand? Will they laugh? Will they cry? Or will they simply walk away, leaving me behind, still hidden in the shadows? Sometimes I ask myself, quietly, in those rare moments alone, have you ever done something that changed someone's day, someone's life, without them ever knowing it was you? The winter had stretched longer than usual that year, the kind of gray mornings that made the world feel muted and heavy, and the cafe had become a small sanctuary in that dull expanse. I had fallen into a rhythm, my secret network of kindness continuing quietly, invisibly, but with more awareness now that people might be suspecting something. The thrill was no longer just about paying for a coffee or leaving a note. It was about the ripple, the subtle movement of human emotion in ways I could only observe and never fully control. Then came the morning that changed everything. It started like any other day, cold and gray, the streets slick with rain. I arrived early, as usual, to prepare the cafe for the day, wiping down tables, organizing the counter, my mind wandering through the countless acts of kindness I had orchestrated over the months and years. I barely noticed the woman from October arrive until she was right there, standing near the counter, her coat dripping, a quiet calm in her eyes that contrasted sharply with the chaos of the storm outside. She didn't order anything immediately. Instead, she scanned the cafe, slowly, deliberately, her gaze landing on me with an intensity that made my chest tighten. She walked past the counter as if I weren't there, then paused near a table where a young man, probably a student, was buried in textbooks, visibly exhausted. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope, placing it next to his coffee without a word, then moved on. My heart skipped a beat. This was new. Someone else, participating, noticing the ripple, becoming part of this silent dance of kindness. I felt an unfamiliar mix of pride, relief, and unease. It was exhilarating to see the chain extend beyond me, but terrifying too. Suddenly, the cafe door opened again, and in walked the man who had confronted me months ago, the one who had whispered, "I know who you are." He stopped mid-step, eyes scanning the room, and then, unmistakably, fixed on me. I froze. His gaze held recognition, something deeper than mere suspicion. It was understanding, maybe even challenge. For a moment, I thought he might expose me, demand an explanation, unravel the delicate balance I had maintained for years. But then he smiled, a slow, almost imperceptible curl of his lips, and sat at a corner table, leaving his gaze on me like a quiet acknowledgement. The tension was unbearable, yet in that tension lay a strange satisfaction. My secret had weight, it had meaning, it had impact. And then it happened. A small child, no more than 7 or 8, ran into the cafe with a scrunched-up face, holding a handful of coins and a crumpled note. He approached the counter hesitantly, looking up at me with wide eyes, and asked if I could cover his mother's coffee. I hesitated, my mind racing. This was real, tangible, a plea from someone who needed help. I nodded, and the cashier processed it, but my hands shook as I watched them leave. The mother's smile, the child's grin, the relief etched into their faces. It was overwhelming, almost too much to bear. And in that moment, I realized the true power of what I'd been doing all these years. It wasn't just about anonymity or thrill. It was about human connection, about small, quiet interventions that could alter the trajectory of a day, maybe a life. The cafe grew busier, the mornings stretching into afternoon, and I continued my work, hands shaking slightly, heart pounding, but mind clear in purpose. Then the woman from October returned, silently observing, and I understood that we were now part of something larger, a silent network of unseen kindness, moving through the world in subtle, unpredictable ways. And yet, with every new participant, every ripple, came the undeniable risk. Someone might discover the full truth, the orchestrator behind it all. My heart ached with the thrill and the terror simultaneously. Hours passed, customers came and went, each unaware of the subtle currents flowing through their day, each unknowingly touched by acts that originated from my small, quiet efforts. And as the day drew to a close, I sat behind the counter alone, reflecting on the chain I had created. The thought that no one truly knew the extent of it, that my influence had spread unseen and unacknowledged, filled me with a complex mix of pride and isolation. I had become a ghost in my own story, a silent witness to human emotion, a keeper of fleeting moments of joy and relief. Yet in that solitude, a question lingered in my mind, heavy and persistent. What would happen if someone traced it all back to me? Would they understand? Would they be grateful, angry, or indifferent? Would they see the beauty in the quiet, unnoticed interventions, or would the revelation destroy the delicate magic I had nurtured for so long? And then, as the cafe emptied and the world outside grew quiet, I smiled to myself, heart racing, knowing that for now, the secret remained mine. No one suspected, no one knew the full extent, and perhaps that was the greatest gift of all. I had touched lives, orchestrated joy, and remained unseen. And as I locked the door and stepped into the cool evening air, I couldn't help but ask quietly, to the night, to myself, to anyone who might be listening, have you ever changed someone's day, or even their life, without them ever knowing it was you? Would you, if given the chance, embrace the thrill and the fear, and remain the invisible hand that nudges the world in tiny, powerful ways?